My guest today is an amazing musician, songwriter, producer, and one of the most accomplished names in music today. He has a brand new album called To the Bone, which comes out August 18th. I'm very pleased to welcome back Stephen Wilson.
Hello, Roy from the Prog Report.
Hi, Stephen. Good to speak with you again, man. I guess the last time we spoke, it was the end of the tour that you did here last year, and
Oh, yeah, with you. Yes, okay, I do remember. It was a book, right? It was some kind of book?
That's right. I've been working on this book, and, you were very gracious. We've covered a lot, and we're almost at the end of the book. I'm almost done, so, thank you for that.
Okay, I do remember, yes. Seems like a long time ago.
It does, right? A lot's changed. New album, To the Bone, which comes out in just about, 8 days, August 18th. I want to jump right in and ask you, when you were putting this album together and writing it, and when you had the vision for how this was going to go, I assume maybe you might have thought to yourself, well, I don't know what the fans are going to think about this one. How's the response been so far? How have you experienced that?
Oh, I mean, to be honest, I'm not necessarily aware. The reviews have been fantastic. From the press, no. My only real awareness at the moment has come from doing the interviews and doing the promotion, and everyone seems, a couple of exceptions, but everyone seems to be really into it. I think, I guess I'm conscious in the back of my mind, of course, that there are some people that will not appreciate the direction that I go in. But I think I've always had that right through my career. I think back to when I made an album many years ago called Stupid Dream, which was very different. It was more of a song-based record. It was very different to the more psychedelic space rock music that had come before. Yeah. And then I think of when In Absentia came out and suddenly it embraced, metal music, and a lot of people didn't like that. So I think I'm kind of used to, I guess I'm used to losing fans and gaining new ones at the same time. But to me, that's what being an artist is, isn't it? You keep evolving, you keep changing, and you confront the expectations of your audience, because that's what real artists are supposed to do, aren't they? Keep evolving and keep it exciting and keep it different. And what's the point of making the same record twice? Now, of course, the subtext, speaking to you, because you obviously write for a prog. Sorry, is it a website? It's a website.
A website,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the subtext is speaking to you, somebody that comes from the prog rock community. I suppose there is a perception of me as being someone that is very much aligned with the world of progressive rock. And while I acknowledge that, I don't feel necessarily that is something that should be restrictive to me. And, of course, if you look at my career in the broader sense, you'll find pop records, you'll find ambient records, you'll find extreme metal records, and yes, you will find more traditionally progressive rock albums too. But I guess I've never thought of myself as a generic artist.
Yeah. We've spoken about that part, and I tend to agree with the vast styles that you've covered. And I think a lot of people in reading, well, he's going in a different direction, we're worried it was going to be a record of all permeating or something even more poppy or something, which the album is not close to that. Where did the vision come from for the 80s pop influence? Did it happen organically as you were writing, or were you influenced during a period and said, I want to make this type of record? When did that decision come?
I think in the back of my mind, okay, firstly, one of the biggest inspirations to me, which, it seems like in many respects, it seems like a negative influence and inspiration, but it's a very important one, is the kind of inspiration to not do what's already been done. So there is always a sense at the beginning of a new project, what can I do with this next record that will be different and will justify its existence in my catalogue? Because I can't, what's the point of making another Hand Cannot Raise? or another, whatever. And so that's number one. What can I do with this record that's going to be different? And I think early on I decided that this record I was going to focus more on my songwriting and strip away perhaps some of the more conceptual rock elements, which I know some people love, but that's still there, and I may come back to that. But this time around, writing songs, perhaps a little bit more concise, and try to. And the second half of the answer to your question is, I think I was very inspired by, not necessarily musically, but inspired by the philosophy of some of the great albums from the 80s that were very beautifully balanced between the accessible and the ambitious. And I think of artists like Kate Bush, I think of artists like Peter Gabriel, like Prince, like Talk Talk, like Tears for Fears, Depeche Mode. The list goes on and on and on. There's a golden era, I think, throughout the 80s. The 80s gets a bad rap, rap sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think the 80s was a wonderfully creative, decade. And a lot of these records that you would say, yes, they're very accessible. They have great choruses, great melodies, great pop songs. But at the same time, there's no sense of dumbing down in order to achieve that. And I think that's the problem with a lot of modern pop. For me, a lot of modern pop is that sense that it's very machine-tooled and dumbed down. And there is definitely a way, as illustrated by those classic 80s albums, of making very intelligent, very sophisticated records, which are both accessible and also very, very ambitious and very, dare I use that word, progressive in the true sense.
Well, I love the fact that a band like Tears for Fears now gets written about in Prog magazine as a band that was sort of prog, which is always one of my favorite bands. And an album like The Seeds of Love, I used to listen to it going, do people know what they're listening to? Because this is not simple pop music. I always thought it was an amazing record, and everything they've done has always been with that mentality.
Yeah, and I think so. And if you go back to the very basics of what progressive means, I don't particularly like the contracted version of that word, as you know.
Sure.
If we use the word progressive in its full form, if we go back to the very, very sort of roots about what progressive means to me, firstly, it was a kind of allegiance to the idea of making an album like a kind of musical journey rather than just writing, putting together a bunch of random songs together. It's that kind of allegiance to the idea of the album as a musical continuum, a musical journey. But also I think progressive ultimately means mixing different styles of music together to create something new, to create new hybrids. And if you go back to the very birth of what we call progressive music, you had bands that were mixing rock with classical music, mixing rock with jazz music, mixing rock with the blues and R&B, and all of those produced different kinds of musical hybrids, which we now think of as being the archetypes of what we call progressive rock.
Yeah.
And I think that carried right through, starting with the Beatles, actually. If you go back to the Beatles, and artists like the Beach Boys and albums like Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper, these are undoubtedly what you would call pop records, very accessible, songs are very concise, very short, but at the same time the roots of experimentation and ambition and conceptual rock music are also right there. And I think there's a tradition that's carried on, as you say, through artists like Tears for Fears and Talk Talk and Kate Bush and even artists like Prince to an extent. And To the Bone is part, I feel, is part of that tradition in its own way.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about the approach for promotion for the album, because I know you have a new label. And, it's been very aggressive. I think 5 songs have been released by now. Was this sort of something that was your decision to want to do that, or the label comes to you and says, let's do it this way? How does something like that come about?
More the latter. I mean, I'm not the most, internet savvy person. I think one of the reasons to go with a new label was to maybe have someone that was a bit more aggressive and stronger in potentially reaching a new audience, a younger audience, perhaps you might say. I've never been about preaching to the converted. I've always felt, this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, I've always felt like there's an opportunity with each record to find some new fans. And of course, one of the the places you find new fans these days is through things like Spotify and streaming services and YouTube and social media. And I'm not really au fait with that. So I kind of defer to my record label and my web guy. And I think this time around, the album is so, in some respects, is so diverse and so eclectic that it was hard to just sort of pick on one or two songs that would give a good idea. And as you say, I mean, Permeating, for example, would have been very easy for us to just release Permeating because it's a very catchy pop song, but it would have given a totally distorted view of the album as a whole. So I think it was almost like, well, we almost need to let people hear 3 or 4 songs just to give them a flavour of what's going on. And even with the 5 songs, I feel like people have still not really got the full idea, of the album, as you kind of hinted at.
Yeah, I love Detonation is one of my favorites, and Song of Unborn is absolutely brilliant. I'm assuming we can expect a lot of the new album on the live shows, and you plan to still play some of the older material?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I'm gonna hopefully go out and play most, if not all, of the new record. I haven't rehearsed it yet with my band, so I don't know exactly what's going to work best. But yeah, I mean, we've already got a lot of new films and visuals commissioned. Something for Song of Unborn. We're doing an amazing new animation for that one, which is going to be absolutely beautiful. So a lot of this music will hopefully be, very strongly represented in the show. And as always, I'll go back and I'll pick some songs that I think, both from my solo records and also going back to songs I wrote, for Porcupine Tree over the years, pick out some other songs. And I always try and put a show together that feels cohesive. So there will be certain songs that suggest themselves as kind of fitting in very well with To the Bone and the kind of theme, not so much musically, but the kind of lyrical themes, which are things I've touched on before. So there are certain songs that kind of already have suggested themselves in my mind. That song lyrically that would fit very well, with the show and with the To the Bone material.
I just have a little bit of time here. I wanted to ask you your relationship with Michael and Opus, and how you got to working with him and producing them, and how that relationship got started.
Well, it was many, many years ago. I was given an album by Opus by a journalist that was interviewing me, and he told me that the bands were big fans of mine, and they'd asked him to pass on the CD. And I mean, even at that time, this is going back a long time now, probably the late 90s, or even, and I think even at that time I was being given a lot of music, and most of it, wasn't really doing anything for me. But this was the exception that proved the rule. I put the album on. I remember putting the album on at soundcheck that night at the gig I was playing. I think I was in Italy or something, and just being blown away with the creativity and the invention. And I dropped Michael a line. I said, I've been given your album. I've got to say I'm really impressed, and you're doing amazing stuff. And straight away I got an email back within 5 minutes saying, can you produce our next record? Which I wasn't expecting. And, it was a very different musical world at that time from the one I was in. But I was interested in more extreme, because Opeth at that time was still very much what you'd call an extreme metal band,
Yeah.
But I was very interested in that, and I thought I could learn a lot from the experience, as well as bringing something to them. I felt like I could learn myself, and you see how much kind of an influence that kind of intersecting with that world had on my music.
Yeah, it really affected both. Well, thank you, Stephen. I know you got to go. Listen, I'm a fan of everything you do. The new record's as good as anything you've done, and I wish you success with it. Hope to speak again soon.
Thanks a lot, man. Nice to speak to you today.
All right, bye.
Have a great day.
You too. Thanks to Stephen for the interview. His new album, To the Bone, comes out August 18th. For upcoming news and interviews, please check theprogreport.com, follow us on Facebook, @The Prog Report on Twitter, or download the podcast on iTunes. Thanks.